let's dive into the reason we're here and talk about the latest episode of DC and HBO's The Penguin. The sixth episode just premiered this past week, and it's entitled Gold Summit. And so we now have only 2 episodes left in the show, and we've been talking about it each and every week. And of course, now in this final stretch, things have certainly picked up in terms of pacing and a lot of the events that are starting to really coalesce and ultimately bring us to the conclusion of what this limited series is ultimately going to be in terms of examining Oswald Cobblepot and his rise to power. But we're going to dive into everything that happened with this week's episode and share our thoughts. But before we do that, we'll just give some big picture general reactions to everything that we saw in this new episode. So before we dive into spoilers, what did you think about the most recent episode of The Penguin?
I think this is another really good episode of television. The Penguin remains pretty, I think, consistent for me. It's not surprising anymore. I'm like, oh my God, that was a good episode. Like, no, this is just, I think, a solid show at this point. Only 2 episodes left after this, and I'm pretty happy in where we are. I love all the plot points that happened in this episode. The acting is still on fire. In fact, some of the things they're saying in this episode I think are very impressive by its subtlety and how quiet, and not even quiet, but how patient I think the show can be, how it meanders on all the right things. It feels like every director, every episode or director they get for every episode just understands the assignment, because every time I'm like, hey, that was different, but also you got it. Like, you think you understood where this thing was supposed to go, and I'm really impressed by that and how consistent that has been throughout the series. And I know the director for this episode is also directing episode 7, and so I'm like, dang, now I'm excited for episode 7 too, if you did this episode. But man, a decent amount took place in this episode. Something I really like is this show has not shied away from comic book themes, but it definitely has been like, hey guys, this is a different look on what comic book content could look like. And in this episode, I think we get a couple of glimpses of like, here's some comic-y things. But when it popped up, it wasn't like out of taste or out of anything like that. It was like, no, it's still cool because we have this different foundation. Now that we have this comic booky thing happening, it remains in taste, and it has poise, and it still feels good when it arises. So still pretty happy with this show. Still really good episodes. Not my favorite, but still a really good episode of TV. And yeah, man, I'm excited to get to it. I liked it.
Yeah, I like that as well. I think, the Penguin it has consistently maintained a certain level of quality for me, and so I did like this episode. I have one criticism that's just been consistent for pretty much every episode, and that's just the fact that the pacing of this is very, very off to me. Things are just happening so quickly. I guess just due to the design of them intending for this to be a limited series, which I still don't quite believe, but they clearly shot it that way and they wrote it that way because a lot of things are happening at just a very, very rapid clip. And I do think that hurts the show in a lot of regards because certain moments do need more time to breathe, and having more opportunity to spend time with certain characters to see how they get to certain places and certain points would be nice. It would be nice to have, but just because we only have but so much time, I think that they are doing the best that they can with the time and the space that they have, and you're still getting really compelling performances from pretty much the entire cast. And what I did like in particular about this episode, which has been sort of ramping up until this week, is just these, I guess, these underrepresented groups of Gotham that we never really see or talk about in mainstream sort of Batman media, just because we're always focusing on Bruce and his stories. But to see just so much of this world is always just like a really cool thing to see how people are affected by the bigger events at play, the political structures, the societal structures. That stuff really, I think, came to pass even in this episode too. There were some things that they kind of pointed out, just with like the social hierarchical class of the working people in Gotham. And I think that's a particular strong point about this show. I just wish that the pacing was just better, because I feel like things are just happening so quickly, and we have to take time jumps, and sort of guess at how long, a particular moment has passed, because we don't quite know. But beyond that, which I do consider somewhat of a nitpick, they do really good stuff in this week's episode, and it's certainly getting us to this, I suppose, this end game in this battle between Oz and Sophia, that the showdown that they're going to have quite possibly at the end of the show. But ultimately it was a pretty solid episode for me, and it kept me excited about particularly what's going to happen next week, as that is going to be the penultimate episode, and I'm sure that there's going to be some it's going to be some big moments in that one. And so I'll just leave it there as we dive into spoilers. And so if you've not seen the latest episode of DC and HBO's The Penguin, this is your spoiler warning. Go watch it and then come back and finish out the rest of our conversation. And really, where we start this week's episode, it kind of picks up where things left off last week. We see that Oz has sort of reorganized his criminal empire in the underground railway sort of headquarters that he's established for himself. And we do take somewhat of a time jump because we see that Bliss, the drug that he's been distributing, it's picked up steam. It's become pretty
Hmm.
successful. It's moving, it's grooving. And because of all of this attention and because of the success that they're getting, we see that Victor is starting to become a little bit worried about, the repercussions of that. Like, hey, Sophia, Sal, they're probably going to figure out where we are. They're going to start to get more information about our movements. And that's not going to be good because we obviously we have a lot to lose here now because we are successful. And we also see on the other side of that, the Sal, he has moved in with Sophia into her mansion because they're starting to plot and establish what their next moves against Oz are going to be. And so Sophia, she's at this point where she thinks the triads are going to be loyal to her. Sal questions
Hmm.
that, like, hey, that's probably not going to be the case. They're going to go on the side of Oz because he has the Bliss stuff. And so they concoct this plan to basically utilize their henchmen to murder Oz's distributors. And they went full Aegon Targaryen. They hung them, they cut off their pinkies, like very, very public display of violence to incite that fear into Oz and into Victor to let them know, like, hey, you think that these people are loyal to you? Well, no, they're not. If
Hmm.
anybody determines that they're going to be loyal to you, if they make that decision, this is what happens to them. They'll get their heads chopped off. So what do you make of just that whole setup, seeing Oz begin that ascendancy to really gaining and establishing power within Gotham, but then the reaction on the other side of it is like Sophia again being very, very ruthless to find a way and a pathway to get to Oz and to ultimately undermine everything that he's trying to build with this Bliss operation.
Yeah, it's impressive, I think, on both sides, and we're starting to see this really cool push and pull between Oz and Sophia. And I think the ways in which we operate, Oz still, he's still in some ways very slimy in the way he works, and I think that's coming out in the way he's moving his way to the top, and he's kind of figuring out on the fly. Versus Sophia, who is more calculated, who was like, I can do this I'm taking these steps to crush and hurt my opponent. And it's just really cool, I think, to see, yeah, just how different it is. Again, Sophia was locked up for years, so she's more calculated. She's been thinking about things a little bit longer. Oz is like, oh man, that didn't work out. Now I got to figure out the next step. Oh man, that didn't work out. Of course, he does have moments of like thinking ahead and thinking forward, but they just move a little bit differently. And so it was interesting to see how those different modes of what it looks like to manage and be a boss in this, I guess, the system that they're in, that they're being bosses of, is how it operates, man. And so it's cool to see Sophia be as ruthless as she can to get to Oz. But what's also so interesting is they know each other, and and they've worked together even before they knew each other. And it's just really interesting to see how they might try to get through into each other's skin, but also how Oz is attempting to rise to the top. So yeah, it's really cool, I think, to see those things play out as the show progresses, because it's always adding another layer, another dimension that you don't think they're going to go to, and you're like, nope, they went there. And yeah, it's just cool to see.
It also it signals this new day in Gotham, this new criminal underworld that is it's unlike what came before it, and that's
Hmm.
what Sophia's arc has largely been about, this new beginning, this rebirth. And it's been a bloody rebirth. It's not been something that's pretty. And perhaps, and I don't know this for a fact, but perhaps what she's doing is taking things to a level further than what's ever been done before. I
Hmm.
imagine, obviously, like her father, we know, very violent, committed a lot of very atrocious acts. But in terms of I guess, the interplay and the relationships between the different families in Gotham, like, I don't know if this much blood had been shed. They haven't
Hmm.
necessarily told us that, but just based on what we're seeing here, I'm wondering if this is just like really, really reckless behavior. Like, of course,
Mm.
she is being able to again incite fear and to get people to be loyal to her and move very carefully so that they don't come into her crosshairs. But at the same
Yeah.
time, when you create this much violence, when you ruffle this many feathers, especially within organized crime, just historically, you look at any form of media, we're always shown and told that that is not a good thing. Anytime somebody gets killed, when it's not licensed or given permission to do so, somebody
Hmm.
does a whacking and
It's a
all of that
code.
stuff, it comes back to
Hmm.
bite you in a really, really terrible way. And I just wonder if that's going to be the case for Sophia. Like, even beyond what she has going on with Oz on a personal level, what other forces and factors might be at play to maybe usurp her and maybe look at her and say, like, hey, you have gotten way out of control. You have let this whole power trip, this revenge mission,
Hmm.
it's just completely consumed you. Now, the thing is that it's not really anybody to challenge her at this point. She's kind of taken out all of her competition. But I think, again, just like examining the rules of fiction, especially when it relates to like crime stories, it feels like her day might be coming because you
Hmm.
can't do all of this stuff and it goes unanswered. That's at
Yeah.
least how I see it. As we move on here and continuing with Oz's story, they do a lot of work with the relationship that he has with his mother to really unpack like what's going on with Frances, and we basically find out that this dementia that she's been dealing with, it's gotten just so drastically worse, and in
Hmm.
fact she's been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which just continues to really create tough, difficult scenarios for her. Her quality of life is not, it's not terrific, obviously. We see a scene of her just staying in really cold water in a bathtub for hours until Oz comes and takes her out. And finally they have this really emotional conversation amongst one another where she kind of comes to her senses and she's able to talk to him pretty plainly and tells her, hey, you need to help me kill myself, essentially, before this
Hmm.
gets worse and before this becomes too severe. I don't want to be around living like a vegetable, not remembering anything, not being able to function. I would rather you take me out so that I don't have to suffer in that way. And initially Oz is like, there's no way in hell I'm doing that. Stop talking that way. But then
Hmm.
eventually in that moment he kind of concedes and reluctantly agrees that he'll do so, which is really painful, obviously, for him to admit in that moment. And I think it's even painful for her to say that, but she's kind
Yeah.
of at the place where it's like, this is not going to get any better, and I'm probably at my worst point now, so we have to have this conversation at this moment. So what did you think of that, just because of the the I think the very contentious relationship that they have with one another? It's obviously not the healthiest, but he has been there and he does look up to her, he does seek out her love and admiration, and to be asked to do this for his own mother has to be just a punch to the gut. But ultimately, I think he kind of looks at her and sees there might not really be any other way. And I want to honor your wishes, even if it's something that I don't even want to do myself.
Yeah, you can only, I think, watch, especially a parent that you've been caring for, suffer in some ways for so long. And you could tell Frances feels the same way. She's like, this thing just keeps taking and taking. Lewy body dementia is so scary because even though they kind of know the cause, but they also like don't really know what it is ever, right? It's just like lumps of protein in your brain, and it like it makes you forget, and it affects your movement and your mood, and just all of these things that normal dementia might not even come with. And Louis body's like almost even worse in that way. And she's like, I'm sick of this. I simply can't do this anymore. And it's so interesting in that moment when she's like you said, she's talking to him like, you have to, I can't keep doing this, you got to do something to where I'm not alive anymore. And it's the one moment where he's like, you don't know what you're saying. She's like, no, I'm right now in this moment, I know exactly what I am saying. And it's just so crazy to, I think, hear that, because there's been so many moments where you have to question. You're like, dang, do you know what you're talking about? Or dang, do you know what's happening here? But in that moment, you very clearly are like, no, she actually knows what she's saying right now. So I think, that was a really, I think, powerful moment to watch and to see Oz have to go through. But it's still the whole thing of like, 1 second Oz is like this scum of the earth person, in the next moment he's taking his mom out of this cold bath and trying to get the electricity put on for her, and like trying to do all these things. Like, you can tell he's loving in certain ways, especially for her. And it's a very interesting thing, I think, to for the show to have to go through, and for us to have to go through and to watch what happens. And yeah, man, I still, like you said, even though he agreed to do so, I still can't even imagine what he's going to be without her around, because I feel like she is the one thing keeping him grounded. She is. And so, man, whenever it comes about, next episode or the last one, it's going to be a sad moment, of course, for Oz, but us as viewers are going to be like, wow, he's officially off the hinges. Like, because I feel like that's it. After that, there's nothing else for us to be like, to feel sympathy for this man.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this moment is here. You know, they're signaling to us like, hey, this will happen, and this is the last tether, I guess, to reality that Oz is going to have before he finally just, I guess, snaps, for lack of a better term, and he just fully
Hmm.
takes on this identity, and becomes kind of cold and calculating and even more ruthless and perhaps even heartless than he is currently, because his mom is the only loving relationship that he's really receiving any sort of admiration or love from, even though she can very much be a tough hard ass on him and has shut him out on several emotional levels and has not been the best. There's still obviously affection and love between those two, and he
Hmm.
obviously has a soft spot for her, considering his brothers are also gone, so he's the only one left. So
Yeah.
they
Hmm.
kind of have this codependency between one another because there is no other family amongst them. And so when that moment does come, it's going to be the turn, for the character that we see that's ultimately going to push him to being even more of a ruthless crime mob boss than he already currently is. But speaking of being pushed, Victor had a very interesting moment this episode. We see somebody from his past actually come back up. Squid, who was a gang member that Victor was initially working with. Squid was the one who basically ordered Victor to go steal the car rims off of Oz, which led Victor to ultimately meeting Oz and being a part of his organization. But now Squid's like, hey, I want in on the action. I see y'all are popping. Everything is going very, very well for you. I want in on this. And Victor's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. I don't think it's going to be a nice situation. You're not going to be welcome in like that. But, basically, Squid is like, no, you need to make this happen for me. He's just completely being very, very aggressive about it. He just wants in. And ultimately he decides to threaten that he'll expose Victor and Oz and the whole organization if he's not allowed in. And that's a big no-no for them, just considering the fact that they are fleeing and hiding from Sal and Sophia. So having the word get out is just unacceptable. And because of that fact, Victor, he takes another big step in terms of his arc, and he ultimately shoots Squid in the neck and kills him, which ultimately is the first person that we see Vic be responsible for killing. And this is a completely different turn for him, just knowing where he comes from and seeing that backstory, knowing that he was just like this innocent kid who kind of stumbled into this lifestyle. Now he has done something that unfortunately he can never take back. And we see he's rattled by that. He's very shaken by it. Oz embraces him once he tells him, what ultimately happened. And Oz is like, hey, it gets easier, the next time you do it. You did the right thing, but it only gets easier from here, which is just like, that's a crazy thing to utter to a person after they just killed somebody. But
Yeah.
Oz clearly meant it. Like, hey, you'll be okay. It'll be better for you from here. So, thoughts on that, and just seeing Victor, take that next big step, doing something that ultimately he probably couldn't even envision himself doing just a few probably short months ago within the show. But what it also might mean for his character, moving forward, the fact that he's kind of, I guess, he's kind of fully transitioned to the dark side at this point. Once you do
Yeah.
that, there's really no going back after that.
Man, we should have known when he pulled up to the underground in a motorcycle with a gun in his. He had a gun tucked. I said, "Oh, this dude, he's him now." Victor really is the right hand man to Oz right now, and eventually he was going to have to do something of this sorts. And I like the situation because it is the perfect mix of your past and your present literally clashing. He knows Squid from his past. Him and his ex, I forgot her name, but they very much didn't like Squid or the person he is. And I feel like in Victor's shoes, there was no winning. If he let Squid in, there's potential for the operation to get messed up because he might tell Sophia and Sal. And if he didn't let him in, he was going to tell Sophia and Sal. Like, there was just too much on the line in some ways to let this guy live. And when he goes to try to tell Oz about what's happening, Oz is not available at all. He's not emotionally available. He doesn't know. he literally doesn't even answer him. And so at that moment, Vic has to take matters into his own hands, and he does, and he has to off Squid. And what's so crazy, I think, in that moment, then a lot of other first kill moments is he literally sits there and watches him die. Like it was like the slowest thing I had ever seen. Like he watched the blood come from his neck. He literally watched the soul leave his body. And I feel like I hadn't really seen any first kill be like that before. Like I feel like a normal first kill is sure they might shoot him and then they run away really fast, and you might hear what happened on the news, or you might hear police cars come, and that's not what happened at all here. Really, he watched him die. It took like 120 seconds, and then he runs off. I was like, dang, this is really dark, and this is kind of crazy. And but this is Gotham, this is Crown Point, and I was like, wow, what a moment. But Victor, he, like you said, he was embraced by Oz, and I think even that moment was very interesting. And it was like the next, I don't know if level up is the word, but definitely the next progression in what Victor's line is going to be. Like you said, Oz tells him it gets easier, and it's like, dude, that's what you're gonna tell me right now, like in this moment. It was sweet. I will say that he embraced him. Oz very much could tell Victor needed to be embraced in that moment. I wasn't expecting that. That was very father figure-y of him. I wasn't ready for that. And maybe that I almost feel like that was a next level in bond for them as well. And I feel like as much as we were talking about Francis, after seeing kind of that go down, I'm like, maybe that is something else that would hurt Vic if that was being taken away from him. And I definitely see foreshadowing there. It's scaring me because I'm like, Sophia coming for you, and that might mean Victor. You know what I mean? Like Victor might get off because of this whole thing, and I think that might be the other person that might send him into a spiral. But yeah, I thought it was a very interesting and very good scene there.
Yeah, Oz definitely has meaningful things to lose now, and Victor certainly being one of them, because that moment, it just reinforces like Oz clearly cares about Victor. He's really grown to, I think, admire him and take him under his wing, and help mold him into who he has become, just because he has been so trusting of him. And he was initially hard on him because Victor was making a lot of mistakes. He didn't really know what he had gotten himself into. He'd bitten off more than he can chew, but Oz has been able to sort of whip him into shape and get him to the level that he ultimately, I think, probably saw in him initially, saw that potential, and now that potential is being realized. And in that world, when you commit that type of act, when you murder somebody, I mean, for somebody who has murdered a lot of people before this, that is like a rite of passage. It's like, okay, this is hard. I see that you need comfort, you need an embrace, but this is a part of it. This is what you sign up for. And so we're gonna have to move on. And you're just gonna have to know and live with the fact that, yeah, you did it and it probably feels shitty right now, but this is not going to be the last time you have to do this. And I'm here to tell you that it'll be easier the next time. It'll be okay. You won't even think about it as much as you continue to
Mm-hmm.
do it, which is a very, just, it's sad, it's sick, it's kind of
Yeah.
demented, but it's the
Mm-hmm.
reality. And I think that
I love
Oz
it.
Oz obviously knows that he knows that that's the case. I mean, a lot of bodies have already been dropped here, and so he just knows, like, yeah, you better get used to it, because
Mm-hmm.
this is just the world that we live in. This is what we signed up for. And so Victor, man, it sucks just knowing where he comes from, and knowing that he had a really, really strong family. He had a loving parent, and his father and his mother, siblings. I mean, he had a relationship. He had all of these things, but that flood in Gotham just, it changed everything for him. But it just goes to show, like, when somebody does lose everything, literally and figuratively, what that could do to a person, like what path that can lead them down. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a really exceptional thing that they've been able to do with the Victor character throughout this show, is to just kind of showcase, like, something that wasn't even his own fault, that he really had nothing
Mm-hmm.
to do with. It was really done to him. It's just changed who he's probably going to be for the rest of his life, and it's kind of sad to see it go down that way. Bonds. You mentioned bonding. We had another interesting bond happen in this episode between Sophia and Eve, and we know in the
Mm-hmm.
last
Mm-hmm.
episode that Eve, she pretty much kind of cut ties with Oz. Like, that was the episode 5, in which she was just like, you know what, enough's enough. Like, this is becoming way too dangerous for me and my girls. But Sophia, again, on a manhunt for Oz, is looking for any information that she can get. She ultimately finds Eve's whereabouts because she know that Eve has been close to Oz. She arrives at her apartment. holds her at gunpoint. It looks very
Yeah.
much like Sophia's going to kill Eve. You know, once she can find out like where Oz is, she'll just completely get rid of her because Eve was technically complicit in the murder of her brother. She provided Oz the alibi to be at her apartment so that he wouldn't get caught for the murder of Sophia's brother, and she now knows this. But they have an interesting moment here. They share a conversation with each other. Eve is like, I'm not telling you nothing, even though I don't really fuck with him anymore. I'm just
Hmm.
not going to give him up in that way, because you know she's not going to get rescued in the situation. So like, why would I give him up? But then Sophia tells Eve something that she did not know. Sophia actually reveals that Oz was also complicit in the murder of her mother and all the murders that Carmine committed, and actually helped Carmine cover that stuff up. Eve did not know this. She was under the assumption that Sophia was indeed the hangman, that Sophia was this mass murderer who was incarcerated in Gotham, did the time that she deserved to do, when in actuality, no, that's not who Sophia was. And this ultimately makes Eve change her mind, and she gives
Yeah.
up Oz's location. Like, oh yeah, he's over in Crown
Hmm.
Point. And they share, I guess, this mutual respect for one another, and the fact that they both have been wronged and fucked over by Oz, and because of that, even though they were enemies initially, they won't be friends. But in this quick moment, Eve will tell her this information, and Sophia can go and do what she's going to do. And Eve is like, you know what, you deserve your shot. I don't know what's going to happen when you show up, but you at least deserve your chance to get back at him for what he did to you. So it was a crazy turn of events, but what did you make of just that whole interaction and how it ultimately sort of changed, I guess, Eve's understanding of who she thought Oz was this entire time?
Yeah, this was my favorite scene in the episode by far. I think there was so much happening and being at play here, but this conversation between Sophia and Eve is so good for so many reasons. It's just like layers and layers. But Sophia, again, it's so interesting because it's the everything changes from when she walks in from when she walks out. Neither one of them knows what's going to go down and what happens, but I'm sure they have like an idea, right? Eve thinks she's probably going to die. Sophia probably did walk in thinking she's probably was going to kill Eve, and Oz, it was going to make Oz pop out or get revenge on Oz and do all these things. And they leave kind of on the same team in a way. And what I also really like when Sophia pulls up to the door, there's like this shot of her heel, and I'm like, wait, that's very Barbie reminiscent. You know what I'm saying? But I think the conversation they're having between the two is like, men have dictated both of our lives in these ways, and left both of us in the dark in different ways. What are we going to do about it? And it's funny because she's left to, of course, not trust Sophia in any way, right? She thinks she's the hangman, but also after getting more information, she doesn't really trust Oz either with the information that she's been given. Everything she knows kind of breaks in that moment. You can even see it in her acting. I think Carmen Jogo is doing so much work right here with her acting, but she's like, even the thing she's doing is going back and forth between how she feels in this situation. She's like, wait a second, you're not the hangman. Oz did this, Oz did that, and now by the end of this conversation, I'm kind of giving Oz up in a lot of different ways, and now I'm kind of on your side after I'm thinking you're coming in here one to kill me, and I think you're the hangman. It's just crazy to see that go down. But even the conversations they're having before that, and about how Eve is again having to change in her work. She has different wigs and different outfits, and I'm like, oh, you may not be Clayface, but that's who you are. You're Eve Carlo. You're a different version of what this Clayface is supposed to be. And I think they're doing it so creative. I would have never thought that this sex worker would be the embodiment of what that character Basil Carlo Clayface would be in the show, and just to see the ways in which they're weaving it into how it works in the scene, I think is so well done. And what they're doing with Sophia is so well done because they do come from two different walks of life in a lot of ways. But to kind of come to a conclusion of how men have gotten both of them to this place in their lives and to leave the way they did, I just thought it was very well done. Amazing scene, acting across the board. They just did such a good job. But it was really just really, I think, refreshing to see something like this in a show like this.
I do think that this was the highlight of the episode for sure, and it's incredible because this was such a natural progression. I think for both of these characters, where everything that leads up until this point, it makes sense, it checks out, and the fact that they've crossed paths and enter this situation as enemies and enter this situation as, hey, one of us is probably now walking out of here and we're going to die. And then seeing what happens on the other side of that, just with a few choice words that are exchanged, and sort of a different understanding of one another and who they are. And I think that that's really what it's
Hmm.
about. Like, I had a perception of you as a person, and it was wrong.
Yeah.
It was totally wrong and off, because this entire show, Eve has been very fearful of Sophia, just knowing that this idea of her being the hangman has loomed large, and her reputation precedes her. Now, what's funny is that Sophia has totally become the hangman now. Like, that is fully her
Yeah.
moniker and identity, but
Hmm.
it actually it's almost irrelevant, because Eve just naturally assumed that that's who she was, just kind of who she became at a very early age, when in fact it's like, no, she's out for revenge. This is a redemption arc for her.
Hmm.
This is not her just being this crazy, unhinged, psycho crime mob boss, running rampant in Gotham. And so Eve has a paradigm shift. And also Sophia. I think Sophia sees what Eve has with the relationship with her girls. She sees this loyalty. These are things that she ultimately can't have. These are things that she's never even experienced. She doesn't know what loyalty looks like. Her whole
Yeah.
family betrayed her, and I think she
Hmm.
admires and respects that out of Eve, that she's willing to die ultimately for that cause. And I
Yeah.
think that that's ultimately what saves Eve's life. Not even the fact that she gave up that information at the end, or maybe
Hmm.
Sophia just isn't, she isn't quite that ruthless that she would just murder another woman in cold blood that way, knowing what
Hmm.
she's seen throughout her life. But I think just the respect that she had for her in that moment really stood out to her. And I think that was just like it was a great choice for her character and a great choice for Eve's character. And I love how they played that whole thing out. Wrapping up here, the last big thing, Oz, he basically sets up this meeting called the Gold Summit, which is the title of the episode. All the gang leaders in the city come to this. He basically wants to unite them against this huge fight against the Gigantes, the Maronis, and all of the upper elite in Gotham. And so it's becoming a real eat the rich situation and scenario, which we've seen a lot
Hmm.
in recent media over the past few years. And one of the triads, he's not convinced, by Oz's leadership initially, but Oz is able to kind of win over everybody by admitting that he killed Alberto. He's like, "Yep, I did it. It was me." And he gets them all on their side, and ultimately, if they can obtain control of Gotham, they can undermine this really wealthy upper elite class of people. Like, this is what it's all about. He's like, they make us eat shit. They don't know our names. He's just like, giving this real, I guess, motivational speech to all of these people, like,
Hmm.
hey, we're doing all the work here and we're not reaping any of the rewards. We're not getting any of the credit. It's time we overthrow this entire system right now. It's time that we create a new Gotham, and that we be on the top, and that we don't have to answer to anybody. And so if you back me, if you're on my side, we can wipe them all out and start anew. And everybody ultimately agrees and sides with them. They all have beers and they toast. It's like a tailgate, that they have
Hmm.
at this meeting. But it was a big leadership moment for Oz. I think this is kind of the first time we saw him command the room, get people to listen to him, to follow him. We know his history. That's just never been a reality for him. People have never
Yeah.
respected him. They've treated him
Hmm.
like lesser than. But now he actively has followers. He actively has a team of people, which I think we kind of assume would have to happen to go up against Sophia and Sal and everything that they have. But how did you feel about seeing this? I guess this kind of full circle moment for Oz, being this lowly sort of driver initially all those years ago for Sophia, not really respected, didn't have a position of power in the Falcone crime family, to now all of a sudden he can unite all the gangs in the city. And he's like, yeah, we're going to start anew and create a whole new criminal underworld in Gotham once we can get rid of the wealthy elite.
Yeah, it's the smartest thing he could have done. Oz also being kind of scraping from the ground up. We know he didn't necessarily come from rich or wealth either. Is definitely on his side here, because I think he understands the hunger that all these other gang leaders share with him. They all started from the bottom. They all are trying to climb somewhere that they've never been before. And him bringing up that these wealthy and the elite don't know their names is the realest thing I've ever heard. Because in this show, and barely shoot in the Batman too, really, we don't know any of the wealthy people. We have not heard about them. We ain't seen them walk down the street. We ain't, the closest thing we've gotten is the mob bosses, to be honest, when it comes to wealth. And even they had to build that. That's not something they were necessarily born into. It's something they had to build and fight for. So I think it's very smart for Oz to be here in this tailgate. And I thought it was really cool for him to have these like beers for them to buy into the idea that he was preaching. I thought it was really cool. I tried to think of a comparison to what somebody else that did that, but I couldn't really think of it. I thought it was really cool. As soon as they popped that tab, that meant I was in, man. And what's also funny is the one person that's going to end up seeing them for who they are is Batman, who is both wealthy and seeing them. But I love like subtleties like that. But yeah, Oz was killing it in this moment. Like you said, he had never been listened to like this. He had never commanded a room like that. But yeah, again, it's such a weird show. One moment you're like, this dude's the scum of the earth, which he admitted to. He's like, yeah, I killed Alberto. Yeah, I did all these things. And you're like, dang, man, that is some bad stuff you did. The next moment, you're like, damn, Oz commanded a room and united all these gang members. You shouldn't be rooting for him. But in this moment, I'm like, hell yeah, Oz, you came together and brought these people together. So yeah, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was funny too. I actually thought that this scene was like quite hilarious because I'm just like,
Yeah.
wait, this is like the most makeshift criminal mob boss meeting I've ever seen. Like they're just meeting in the
Mm-hmm.
parking lot, they're just grabbing beers. Like this is so unofficial. It's the complete opposite of seeing Sophia in the big mansion come into the big
Right.
room with the table, like the really official. We got suits on.
Mm-hmm.
Complete opposite of that, but it's reflective on their positions within the city and within this world. It is sort of illuminating the fact that they do come from the lower class, quote unquote, and because of that, they're like, yeah, enough's enough. Like we can take control of this shit. We don't have to just sit here and eat shit for the rest of our lives and
Mm-hmm.
answer to these people who don't respect us, who don't acknowledge us. They don't give us any real responsibility. They just consider us as just their whipping boys, their henchmen, whatever the case may be. And they're like, yeah, no, this is a new day, and so let's unite, let's do this, and let's team up because we actually have the ability and the resources now. And kind of the most important thing, we have the distribution of like a very popular drug. Like these are all big things that are working in their favor, to ultimately help them win in the future. And so, again, another moment that I think we expected. We expected some element and some method of leadership that would have to come into play for Oz, and ultimately for him to assume that power, because he can't be a chief with no tribe. He needs people to follow him, and so
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting to see it go down in this particular way, because I think it kind of speaks to his character and speaks to who we know him as, and it wasn't
Yeah.
something that felt like it was out of place. And so I enjoyed the scene for what it was. Any last thoughts on this week's episode or what might come in the next two episodes before we wrap up here? I guess like the last big scene is that we see Sophia pop up at Victor and Francis's apartment. She's found them. I doubt she kills them. I'm pretty sure she kidnaps them because she's going to want more information. But she
Mm-hmm.
now has them in her possession, which is definitely going to weaken Oz in his position next week. So, any thoughts on just like where things are going to move into the next week's episode?
Man, I just know things are a little bit complicated for Sophia because she one cannot believe that this dude's mom is alive. She's like, "Whoa, what? Like this dude, his mother is here in front of me." Part of me thinks she's of two minds. Like, oh my god, the things I'm about to kidnap and do to these people, but also like there's still like a soft side to her too. Like, oh, he has a mother. Like, I don't have a mother anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of complicated feelings there. And I love how that also went down after Victor is like looking at the blood on his shoe, like, damn, I just killed a person. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just so much push and pull in this show, and I just can't wait to see how it manifests in the next episode. I know it's about to go down, like you said. She probably kidnaps him. I just that was like one of the coolest cliffhangers I had ever seen. I was like, whoa, that's the end of the that's when we fade to black. Like that's the moment we fade to black when she walks in with a crowbar in her hand. And yeah, she's not about to crowbar this old lady. You know what I mean? So yeah, I can't. I'm just pretty. I'm pretty excited to see how they figure out this what goes down. But yeah, I feel like Oz is gonna be pretty pissed once he figure out what happens. So yeah, it's gonna be an interesting penultimate episode. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think she walked in fully intending to completely just obliterate whoever was in that house,
Whoever, yeah.
and then she sees Victor and Francis dancing, and it's like fuck. I why do you have to humanize this
Ah,
prick again and make me feel what?
yeah.
Because they, like you said, they know each other. They do have a relationship. She knows
Hmm.
Oz. They have been connected for a long time. At one point, she did kind of trust him. So it's
Hmm.
hard to just block that out. Like as upset and as mad as she might be at him, to know that he does have a mother, that has to speak to her in some sort of way. So yeah, I can't wait to see how that ultimately affects her character and affects her choices moving into next week's episode. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on episode 6 of DC and HBO's The Penguin. If you've checked it out, hit us up and let us know what you think.